Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Sareh Heidari. I work at BBC News. I've been there as a web developer for about 2 years now. And later on, feel free to come up and talk to me about what I do. And I've got some stickers as well, if you want some BBC News stickers. Yeah. Yes, bribery with stickers. This is a photo from a couple of years ago. That's me. I had the pleasure of being a volunteer here 2 years ago. It was my first ever web development conference. And I think it was such a phenomenal experience. It's kind of changed the people I've met here. And it's changed my career, I think, over the last 2 years. And it's basically been a reason why I'm now speaking on stage, which is awesome. So I'd love to give, if you could all give a huge round of applause to Peter and the rest of the team for making this such amazing. Thank you all. Cool. So now performance. What is performance? First time I heard this, in a work environment, I was like, what are we talking about? I was used to kind of like drama or sports, or you might watch the World Cup, people talking about performance and things. I was hearing things in a different context. When people were talking about it, they were using it interchangeably with things being fast. So, okay, cool, just a different context. Words can mean different things. Interesting. So in terms of web pages loading fast, because that was considered a performant experience. Because I think a lot of us, if you're on the phone, if you ever in patchy connections, you have this kind of thing of like a phone as you're waiting and waiting and waiting for things to load up, whether that's on the tube or on patchy connections or on holiday somewhere. But I think performance is actually wider than that. It's about the user's experience in general. And I want to discuss a few things with you about that. So this is a screenshot of my experience that I had when I was on holiday in Iran, and I was accessing the internet through a VPN. And so, and it was on a device in a new location, so a new IP address, so they asked me for my 2FA, two-factor authentication code, which was fair enough. But what would happen is that it would expire every 60 seconds. And by the time I'd actually be able to load the page and enter it, the 60 seconds would expire. And then I'd basically be trying for about 5 or 10 times to be able to just log in. And that was very frustrating. And yes, I mean, I'm sure the site's fast on if I'm not using a VPN and I'm not on a connection and I'm not on using a tourist SIM card and things, but I was doing all those things. So my experience was very not ideal, I would say. So that's why I care, but why should you in the audience care? Why should you care about these things? Because you might think, okay, I want to just build my functionality of my app for my site, because that's mainly what users want, right? Well, I think that actually it's a little bit more different than that. So I think this is a lot on the slide. So slow experience on high bandwidth, low latency connections often actually lead to impossible to load sites on low bandwidth and high latency connections. So briefly, let's talk about what that means. So bandwidth, if you imagine water flowing through a tube, because that's how the internet works, right? It's all tubes. Basically, wider diameter, larger bandwidth, longer tube, high latency, basically. I'm sure there's a lot more technical terms than that. So yeah. So slow experience on high bandwidth and low latency often makes experiences quite impossible. So why should we care? Because on the internet is increasingly how we access a whole lot of services. So from healthcare to education, I'm sure lots of you in terms of tutorials and things, learning about web development, it might be quite meta. Somebody might be watching this on the internet right now. Hi, people in the future. And then people might want to view what their rights are, citizens' rights online. People from marginalized groups use the internet as a way to form connections and communities. And okay, some of these might be vital things, but also entertainment. I don't think we should ignore things like entertainment, because that is a way that we can enjoy and and express ourselves, and people should have access to all of these things, I think. And I think if we don't consider performance as a priority, we're essentially creating barriers around the content of our websites for other people. Yeah, performance is about access. So now I'm going to briefly go through a few quick tips in terms of what we can do to address performance issues on our sites. So I thought I'd start with something that most people will have access to. So in your browser, if you open up your DevTools. I'm assuming most of you are quite familiar with the browser DevTools. Some of you might not have used the network tab much. So this is in Chrome, this is in Firefox. I tend to use the browsers in different ways. So for Firefox, I tend to use CSS grid stuff, inspector stuff for that. Whereas for Chrome, I tend to use for web performance stuff, for their tool sets. So because those screenshots are very difficult to see on from far away, I thought I'd just make a little stylized versions of them instead. So when you have the list in the timeline view in the network tab, what you have is on each row you've got an asset. So that might be a CSS file, it might be a JavaScript file, it might be an image, all of your different assets that you have, and along this bottom you have a timeline. You have a timeline. So what you have is that let's talk about an example. Let's talk about an example where you're trying to load a page and some of it partially loads and you're waiting for the other things to load. Right. What we want to do is in this scenario where some of the page is loaded and the other parts haven't loaded, it's because what's happening is that you've kind of reached like a point in the middle of that timeline, and some of the things that you want the page to be on the page aren't there. So what we need to do here is that one of these rows, which is like the image or the widget in the middle there, needs to be shifted a little bit longer so to the left, so then it's earlier on in the view. So as we go along, we have, as we load in, for example, the headline and things like that, and the CSS and JavaScript and things like this. What we want to do is to be able to move these, some of these assets so that they're loaded earlier on. Right, okay, so there's a lot of lines, right? If we look at this, this is like 7 or 8 lines, but then on most pages there's like sometimes hundreds of assets. You've got tracking, you've got all sorts of things that you've got beacons going off everywhere. Lots of things. So how do you actually know where to start even? The first thing is to try to identify which resources you want to prioritize. So you'd look at your designs, so you've just like a little bit of a wireframe there. You might have a logo, banner, headline with a web font. You might have a search bar, whatever your design of choice is. And then what you'd want to do is then to take those things that are in your initial viewport on mobile or desktop, and then try to map that onto the different lines in your timeline. So to say the font that's used in your headline, where is that on the list, or the image that's really above or right at the beginning, all the logos and things. How far down in the list is that in this waterfall, as it's called? Right. So let's say you've identified all of those. Now it's very important to step back from the technical aspect of it and think, what is actually the user's priority? What are they trying to do? Is it, in the case that I just showed, is it to read an article? In which case, the text and things and the image gives context. The image wasn't loaded, so you won't be able to get a whole part of the design and the aim of that page is to convey to the user. So you think about, okay, what's the user's priority? And then what you ideally want to do is just to tell the browser what you've decided, what you think is that most important thing to render. And you can. They're called resource hints. So briefly, since, actually, hands up. How many people are actually quite comfortable with network tabs and not? Hands up? Okay, cool, nice, you're ready, cool. Brilliant. Well, actually, it's interesting because there are about 3 performance talks, so it makes sense that all of you are quite interested in it. Great. Brilliant. So then some of this might be familiar to you, but I'll just go through it briefly anyway. So there's different sections in terms of when you're loading a resource. So, for example, so to resolve the DNS, if your asset's on a different domain, and then to connect, the connection, and then the TLS, the handshake, and then you wait for the time to first byte, so to wait for the response, and then to download the file, and then after that you'll be passing. So they're looked at different colors in Chrome and also in Firefox and DevTools and all of the others, but there's a listing there. Also, yeah. So. So the first resource hint I want to talk about is DNS prefetch. This has been around for a while. Yes, and so just to talk through this, there are a few different diagrams on the left. It's kind of before applying the resource hint, and on the right after. And the hint is basically a link tag that you'll put in the head of the document. And what it tells you is to say, to prefetch, that domain. So for example, if your CSS file is on this domain, mydomain.co.uk, for example, for it to, and you need that CSS file for for something above a file. So let's say it's like the logo, the banner at the top, or the menu button or something like that. Then you'll include that, and what happens is that if you notice, like the part that's shaded in the same color as the part number 1 gets removed, because so then the time that's taken, I don't know whether this will work. Yeah, the time that's taken between the start of the page and then the end of this particular CSS file from loading in is reduced by cutting out that DNS. That's what that does. Pre-connect does a couple of extra things. It's a newer resource hint. So it's actually available in fewer browsers, but more browsers, some of them have them behind a flag, so they'll be available shortly. And what it does is that it basically, so like the previous one that skips out, that does section 1, sorry. What this does is sections 1, 2, and 3. So the DNS part, the connections, and often the TLS handshake as well. So then basically you save that, and so basically the point at which you save that time. So the point at which your CSS file has been loaded and you've got the CSS on the page running is much shorter. And what you'll do generally is that you'll put both of these in your heads, because on new browsers they can use pre-connect, and then and old browsers that don't have that capability, you can use prefetch. In this example, this is actually from the BBC News site. So we've served ads outside of the UK, but we cannot legally show them to those inside the UK because of a thing called the license fee. So British public pays. So it's a legal requirement, so we can't. So we need to have a blocking JavaScript file to determine where you as a user is in the world. And only after that JavaScript has executed would we actually start rendering anything. So we were not allowed to, because, for example, the layouts of the page with the styles is going to be different with the ads as opposed to without ads. So we need to decide upfront which set of resources we need to put in. Right. So we know that this JavaScript file is always needed. Right. So what we want to do is to tell the browser, hey, why don't you preload this file? So this is the preload. So what this does is that I can link to this. So this is a link with a rel of preload, and we put an attribute of as script to tell it's a script file. And that's like an example URL to the script. And what this will do is it will tell browsers that support it when it gets to this in the head, to go ahead and make the connections and things to fetch that file. And so this is like an artistic rendering of the actual one, because it was a very, very long screenshot, in which the part which pointed to there's the JavaScript. Part of the JavaScript there. That was the file. It's basically waiting like almost like half a second before it starts rendering, and then that blocks everything else. And then with that, we're basically just adding a single element there at the top. It moves right there to the start, and then all of these start rendering just after that started. So then basically the whole site ends up being like half a second faster, which is quite cool, because it's like not that much effort either, which is nice. Right. So let's get on to metrics. Because, okay, let's say you've done this on your machine, but like you need to reproduce this, right? You need to be able to tell other people. If you work in an organization, you probably need to show your manager why you're spending your time doing this stuff, right? But there are a lot of them. I will spare going through the definitions of all of these because we probably don't have enough time, but we can talk about this later. There are a whole lot of them, and every year there seems to be more because there are different user experience metrics and things. There's like a new one called like the hero metric as well, which is interesting. So Alex and McKnight at Etsy in their performance team gave a great talk at Smashing Conf earlier this year. And she mentioned that it's really important to link performance metrics to business metrics, because then it aligns the team. It aligns the team, and it also you get everybody from product and engineering working in the same direction. Good. Just a brief mention of web page tests. So you can use this to run kind of similar things to what you do in your console locally, but across different devices. So you can put your URL in there, and it will run it off devices. There's devices all around the world there. This is a screenshot from Patrick Meenan's thing. That's his basement, where he actually has these devices, which I thought was awesome. It's actually that. It's not like some server or anything. It's like that, which is great. And then on the output of the runs, you get like a screenshot of the whole output there. And then you can run multiple ones, and you can make them so that you run them on each build, for example, so you can see the regressions. So if you've got improvements, if you've done a web performance review and you've added those link resource hints, you can see, you can show how your metrics have changed. Tammy Everts from Speed Curves, she's the Chief Experience Officer there. She talks about custom metrics. And she says that they're a great solution, and they remain the best solution for real user monitoring. So what does that mean? It means that when you've got that whole list of metrics that you've got, that you could kind of like, I don't know, what do you want to do? Like pick them out of a hat? Do you kind of go, which one's the most popular one this year? What happens when there's a new one next year? How do you justify that? Then the solution is to not necessarily just go with the crowd, but to decide what's best for your product. What's better for your users. So a brief interlude, apologies, there's a little bit of JavaScript ahead. I promise it's relevant. The user timing API with custom metrics. So the timing API, you can include a very brief line here. I mean, that's literally all you write. There's no kind of, that's not like a short format or anything. It's a script tag with performance.mark and the name of that mark. And what that does is that in browsers that support it, basically generate a timestamp in that performance timeline. So whenever that bit of script is executed, it kind of generates a timestamp and saves it against that name. And there's another one which is called measure, performance measure, and then you can name that, and then you can pass 2 different marks to it, and it will give you the duration and things. So what you could do is, if, for example, if you've got a style sheet, If you've got a style sheet, it has your concatenated minified styles. You've done all that you can do to compress it and make it as small as possible. But you want to see how it works, how performant it is. So what you can do is you can put a mark before styles, you can do mark after styles, and you can measure between them. And then you can, and then what you can do is, you could do like a console log if you want, but you can do something more interesting than that. You can actually hook this up to web page tests. So when you have your web page test results, you can actually have them working against that. So you actually see them as vertical lines in your web page test results. So then you can benchmark your product. You can benchmark your performance against your own product-specific metrics. Right. You can also look up WPOstats.com, which is web performance optimization, to see benchmarks from other organizations. And quite fun is that it's open to everyone. So once you've done your own research and you've got your own metrics and things, you can actually upload your case study. So say you've done performance optimizations and you want to share with the world what the impact is. Highly recommended to upload it there. So yes, so web page tests and custom metrics work really good. Great. Only like 14% of sites actually use custom metrics. And usually that's because it's a lot of effort to set them up. So although I thought I'd mention them because they're something that I haven't really seen mentioned that often, but really there's a whole lot of other things that you can do with performance that we don't have time for today, but happy to chat with you and hear what other things I haven't got on the list as well later. Yeah, and so in summary, start simple, cover browser tools, use your browser tools and to examine your site. Identify key parts of your page's user experience, and to measure against with the custom metric, and then optimize, and then obviously profit. Yes, your users will save time and money for that. I want to give a special thanks to Harry Roberts because he gave a brilliant performance workshop in-house for us earlier this year, which helped a lot. And I've got a whole bunch of resources and things as well, and thank you very much as well.